Samsung Mobile appears to be branching out into, of all things, the logistics business. That is because at this week's Impact event, they were firing on all 12 cylinders and delivered like UPS trucks. Now, this is apparent because Samsung was able to suck all of the oxygen out of the room and dominate the news cycle with updates to their Galaxy S10 line of devices, in addition to the Samsung Galaxy Fold. Now, to be clear, I am not referring to the people that were presenting at the event, because to be honest, at best they were distracting, and at worst they were just downright awful. But what I am referring to here is how the Samsung marketing team was able to coordinate and execute on what some are calling a series of controlled leaks to generate excitement and fervor, or at the very least, curiosity with the average consumer. No, not that. No, like an average consumer, not the average consumer. You know what I'm saying. Now, I don't think it's any coincidence that the event was held at the Bill Graham Civic Auditorium, which is just a stone's throw away from Apple's campus in the rent capital of the world, San Francisco, California. Now, some would say that Samsung is taunting Apple by coming into Apple's backyard for this announcement. As someone who doesn't pay close attention to the Samsung leaks or news, because frankly, I live in the iOS ecosystem and I practically bleed 6 colors, I can tell you that during the event, I was highly engaged with watching it, and after the event had ended, I was generally curious about the device and its capabilities. So curious, in fact, that I went ahead and ordered a Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus. And then it dawned on me that this is not the Samsung of yesteryear, because Samsung is playing the marketing game better than they ever have, really, and in some aspects, they're playing it as good, if not better, than Apple has recently. So in today's video, I'm going to go ahead and outline 3 strategies that Samsung absolutely nailed during the course of this event, and tell you whether or not Apple should be worried about erosion of their customer base. I'm Mike, and this is Tech 24/7 TV. If this is your first time here, welcome to the channel. If you're a regular, welcome back, and now let's get started. Samsung further segmented its line of devices this year by adding the Galaxy S10e on the low end of the pricing spectrum to compete with the iPhone XR. Now, simply introducing a new phone in itself is not extraordinary, but it's the execution of that approach which brings me to my first strategy point. When you're thinking about the components that make up devices, Samsung has extraordinary cost structures when it comes to display technologies, storages, and processor fabrication. Now, in 2 of those 3 areas, Samsung can compete with Apple asymmetrically because Apple does not simply produce storage, nor do they produce panels. So this will allow Samsung to use components that traditionally those components were kind of held for more high-end or high-tier devices and put them into a lower cost device, and by extension, they are able to address new market segments by having these kind of components that people want in lower cost devices. Now, this year, more than any other year, Samsung seems to be leveraging its cost structures to include these higher-end components into their devices, including the Samsung Galaxy S10e. Now, if we compare the S10e against the iPhone XR, honestly, I think the Galaxy wins 8 out of 10 times. Now, the S10e has a 5.7-inch display, and this is going to be compared to the iPhone XR's 6.1-inch display. So if you are strictly looking at from like how many inches is the display, the iPhone XR is the clear winner here, right? But now, bigger might not be better, as some people might tell you that, because the smaller display on the S10e, one, runs at a higher resolution, so it runs at 1080p compared to it's like 820 or 840p on the iPhone XR, and it actually has more pixels per inch. It's roughly 438 from the Samsung Galaxy SE to 326 on the iPhone XR. Looking at the front-facing cameras, the Galaxy S10e has a 10 megapixel shooter in comparison to a 7 megapixel shooter on the front of the iPhone XR. Now, since Apple doesn't publish the size of its battery, it's not really a fair comparison to say, or to compare the iPhone XR against the 3100 milliamp hour battery on the S10e. If you're interested in those type of comparisons, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, because once those Galaxy S10 devices come out, I'll be running usability tests of them against the 2018 iPhone. So make sure you're subscribed. So from the aspect of playing to your strengths, I don't believe that Apple needs to be worried about Samsung, because Apple is well known about being tightly integrated from a vertical standpoint by wanting to own all of its core technologies. That said, I do think Apple should remain mindful of its competitors' strengths and continue to branch out to purchase components manufacturers that might be commoditized but could end up playing into kind of delivering an end product that has a lower cost to the consumer. And this brings me to my second point, which I feel Samsung absolutely nailed. This is the flywheel effect that starts with kind of knowing what you're really good at, and then it leads into being able to differentiate that superior hardware with software feature sets. So if we take a step back and look at the framing for the larger event, Samsung opened up the event talking about the Galaxy Fold, and many people were thrown off by this approach, thinking that Samsung should really save the best for last, right? And close the event with talking about the Samsung Fold. As the event kind of progressed, they talked about how innovation in engineering and manufacturing would manifest itself in the experiences of the customer who are using the device every day. Now, if we apply that same line of thinking, Samsung framed the entire event in the correct manner. Hardware plus software turns into experiences for the customer. This is exemplified by the way that their customer unlocks the device using the ultrasonic fingerprint reader, or how a customer is able to interact and view the display in direct sunlight with the pixel-dense HDR Plus display. Now, should Apple be worried? So from this aspect, I do feel that Apple should be worried because it demonstrates that Samsung is continually sharpening the saw and improving its delivery when it talks about its messaging into the marketplace, which is leading to sales from consumers, much like myself, who historically have been locked into or fully integrated into the iOS ecosystem. Now, that's not a good result for Apple. Now, I'm not saying that I'm going to ditch every piece of Apple hardware that I own. As a matter of fact, this entire video is written and edited on an iPad Pro, but it does mean it takes one person who functions kind of as their family's technology guru to start to shift the tides from one device manufacturer to another. And let's be honest with ourselves, the war for smartphone superiority is won by a series of small strategic battles where the brands looking to engage unknowing consumers turn them into advocates over a long period of time. It's nothing that's done in one fell swoop or overnight. So the third and final strategy that I think Samsung absolutely enabled is squarely focused on rethinking the customer experience. Now, it's about staying committed into your decisions, but remaining flexible in the way that these decisions are going to be implemented or approached. Specifically, I am referring to the way that Samsung implemented Bixby and the user interface on the device itself. It was almost like Samsung was kind of shoving Bixby down our throats, saying, hey, you need to use this. And I mean, even kind of the previous Samsung UIs, it was so clunky, it didn't feel right, it was very cartoonish, it was kind of comical. I think they use Comic Sans in some of those screensavers. Well, this year is a little bit different because it seems like Samsung is actually listening to their customers. First, you can remap the Bixby hardware button on the device. I'm not sure if you knew that, but that's actually kind of a big thing because in the previous devices, you could not remap that hardware button. And the implementation of the Samsung One UI, which from all the devices I've seen on it, actually looks pleasing to me. And I think objectively saying it's much better than what we had, what was there before. So Samsung realizes that the phone of the future has a very different interaction model than it is today. So today, we obviously hunt and peck with our fingers, these styluses, as Steve Jobs called them. And in tomorrow's world, it will be a voice-first interaction model. Now, by continually working forward to improve and refine the user experience and the way that we interact with the device, Samsung demonstrates that they can and will work towards kind of rethinking the customer experience when you have the device in your hand, when you're using it, from a UI UX perspective when absolutely necessary or when necessary. So should Apple be worried? Apple should be partly worried because Samsung is taking plays right out of Apple's playbook, which puts them kind of one or two steps behind when Apple were to implement something. But as Samsung gets accustomed to thinking differently, they start to build and cultivate this discipline on how they solve problems and how they approach problems from a different perspective. And this could end up leading to Samsung implementing these customer-centric approaches much earlier or completely differently than the way that Apple does. As far as objections go on whether or not Apple should be worried about the potential erosion of their customer base, it's not unreasonable for many of you to think, and if not already commented below, that Apple has a lock on user experience to such a high degree at the macro level because of the way that they integrate the user experience between all of their devices. And honestly, I agree with that statement. Users that are kind of deeply integrated into the iOS or into the Apple ecosystem have a very slight or have almost zero chance of leaving that ecosystem because of the high satisfaction rates that they experience with all of the Apple devices. Now, that's not to say those are not the people or those are not the type of users that Samsung would target with this type of kind of aggressive strategy that they're putting forward here. So users that are deeply integrated into the Apple ecosystem have a very small chance, if at all any, for leaving the ecosystem because for the most part, that user satisfaction numbers that people experience with the iPhone and kind of the adjacent devices is very high when compared to the rest of the industry. Now, these are not the type of customers that Samsung is targeting because these users are so highly satisfied with the experience. Samsung would be targeting a much smaller group of customers that are marginally dissatisfied with the experience from one aspect or the other. You could think of it from like a, what am I paying to what am I getting perspective. So for example, think about Google's Shot on Pixel campaign, where Google seemingly compares the Pixel 3 photos to that of the newest iPhone. Google can't compete or won't compete on a number of different fronts, but it knows from a camera perspective that it's superior to that of the iPhone. At least that is what they think. Now, I can tell you personally, I know almost 15 people who love taking photographs and had an iPhone, and up until when the Pixel 3 came out, they had then switched to the Pixel 3 completely, or now they're carrying two devices, both an iPhone and a Pixel 3. In either scenario or neither outcome is good for Apple because it's a loss to some degree of people spending money on hardware, and that's really what their business is about. And this really brings me to my third point here. Do you think that this year's Galaxy S10 lineup is stronger than it has been in previous years? And is it compelling enough for you to want to go ahead and switch from your iPhone? Let me know in the comments below. Hit like, hit subscribe, consider sharing this with someone who's an Apple fan to get their thoughts, because I really like hearing other people's perspective and kind of calibrating my own thinking in that way. I really appreciate you being here, and thanks very much. We will talk to you in the next one.